So I want to welcome you on behalf of the Center for Mind, Brain, and Consciousness. I'm Ned Block. I'm co-director of the center. The other co-director is Dave Chalmers, who you'll be hearing from soon. The session is going to be about a famous bet between Dave Chalmers and Christof Koch at the second meeting of the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness in Bremen, and you will be hearing about the terms of that bet. And the winner will get 2 bottles of really great wine, which are in a box right over here, I can testify. So the results, you're going to hear some empirical results, and they stem from a funding initiative by Templeton World Charities, which has funded a number of so-called adversarial collaborations in which advocates of different views have agreed on experiments that would maybe not decide between their views, but at least challenge some views and support other views. So the results you're going to hear about concern an adversarial collaboration, testing the global neuronal workspace view, and the information integration view. So you will be hearing in the course of tonight which side is supported and which side is challenged. I should say, as an advocate of a different theory, that anything that supports the information integration view is just as good support, given the design of the experiments, for any localist theory of consciousness that places perceptual consciousness in the seat of perceptual consciousness in the perceptual areas of the brain. Another plug, Dave and I and Bu He are directors of another adversarial collaboration that is not yet ready to announce, but you'll be hearing about it later. Okay, so moving on, I am pleased to introduce the moderator of today's event, Heather Berlin. She's a neuroscientist and clinical psychologist and associate clinical professor of psychiatry and neuroscience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. And she hosts the Nova series, Your Brain, on PBS. And I haven't seen it myself, but everybody tells me it's really good. She's also hosted Science Goes to the Movies on PBS. And Discovery Channel's Superhuman Showdown. She also co-wrote and starred in the critically acclaimed off-Broadway show Off the Top about the neuroscience of improvisation and the Edinburgh Fringe Festival show Impulse Control. So let's hear it for Heather Berlin.
Thank you all for being here tonight. We're going to have some fun. I'm going to start out by saying that the study of consciousness is not really a respectable scientific discipline. At least that's what my supervisors told me when I was a young graduate student wanting to study this. They said, you can't study that. That's left for, the philosophers. I wanted to know, what is consciousness? What's the relationship between the human brain and mind? This was in the early 2000s. And they said, no, you have to do serious scientific work first. You have to be taken seriously. And maybe when you retire or you have tenure, then you can study consciousness. So like many in my field, I chose to study dysfunctions of consciousness. I studied neurological disorders, psychiatric conditions, things that had to do with prefrontal cortex dysregulation. And this was in the early 2000s, as I said. And this idea that you can actually scientifically study the neural correlates of consciousness was not fully embraced by the broader scientific community. But this is the question, right? What are the specific set of neural processes in the brain that give rise to conscious experience? The neural correlates of consciousness, the NCC. So tonight we're going to talk a bit about that, but we're not just here to discuss, we are here to adjudicate, which is a rare privilege in our field. And it was 25 years ago, almost to the day, June 20th, 1998, this was at ASSC 2 in Bremen, Germany, that two young academics named Dave and Christof met up at a bar after a long day of lectures, quite like today at ASSC 26 that most of you have been at. Which means beers come next. So, their prefrontal cortices were slightly downregulated due to some fine German beer, and they made a bet. The prize, a case of wine. And I have to make a minor correction to Ned, wherever he is. It's actually 6 bottles of wine. So, and some of them are quite fancy, I might add. And the bet was that within 25 years, they would have it, the specific neural signature of consciousness. Now, in part 1 of this evening, we're going to discuss, we'll introduce the idea of the neural correlates of consciousness and the specific, the exact parameters of this bet. And we have some evidence we're going to bring to light so we can get everything correct so we know who the true winner really is. In part 2, we'll take a closer look at 2 of the central theories that have emerged as lead contenders. They're not the only theories, but they're kind of leading the race a bit to identify the neural correlates of consciousness, and we'll introduce the Templeton World Charity Foundation experiment to determine which of these 2 theories may be closest to the truth. In part 3, we'll unveil for the first time the results of that experiment, and we'll use that to potentially help adjudicate the real reason we're here, to resolve the bet. And in between, we'll have some musical entertainment from the Amygdaloids and from rapper Baba Brinkman. So that should be fun. But let's get to it. We're here tonight, as I said, 25 years and 3 days to that fateful day, June 20th. Happens to be my birthday, no big deal. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce those 2 young academics, Christof Koch, neuroscientist, chief scientist of the Tiny Blue Dot Foundation, and meritorious investigator at the Allen Institute, where he was previously the president and chief scientist from 2015 and 2011, respectively. He's the author of 5 books and more than 350 peer-reviewed publications, which were cited over 150,000 times, so quite the impact. And philosopher Dave Chalmers. He's a professor of philosophy and neuroscience here at NYU, as well as the co-director of NYU's Center for Mind, Brain, and Consciousness, and he's also the co-chair of this very ASSC conference, and author of numerous books, including his most recent book, Reality Plus. And he's, of course, well known for having formulated the hard problem of consciousness. So it's my pleasure to bring to the stage Dave and Christof, who look every bit as young as they did 25 years ago. Come on.
You haven't changed a bit.
I'll start with Christof. Christof, tell us a little bit about your initial collaboration with Francis Crick back in 1990. We're going back in time now. We do a little history of the science of the study of consciousness and also of ASSC. But tell us about your initial collaboration with Francis Crick that ignited and sort of legitimized this field, and what kind of response you got at first.
Francis and I thought it was inexcusable for science not to address the central problem at the heart of our existence, namely that we're conscious. And rather than sort of pontificating or developing theories of consciousness, we said it really has to be about an empirical, operational, pragmatic program. And so we formulated this idea, let's look at the neural correlates and do it in monkeys and in possibly in mice and in humans and in patients, and sort of had a series of publications where we advocated for specific ideas, but the main thrust was to make it empirical testable, sort of to try to move away from what we thought were relatively sterile debates of the last 2,400 years of philosophy, and actually make some progress.
And here we are, 25 years later.
And what kind of response did you get, though, from the community, from the scientific community? Was it, were you embraced with open arms, or was there some pushback?
Don't do it before you have attained the holy state of tenure.
Right. That's what I was told as well. So Dave, tell us about your initial response, first of all, to that paper that Christof and Francis published back in the 90s, and then also when you first met Christof and what that was like.
Yeah, I read the Koch and Koch paper on the search for neurobiological theory of consciousness, I guess in 1990 when I was a second-year graduate student. And I thought, okay, this is fantastic. This is great that neuroscientists are getting really actively interested in consciousness again, because yeah, it's been a perennial topic in philosophy, but it's kind of, it's swung in and out of favor in science, especially in neuroscience and psychology. And in retrospect especially, that 1990 paper really was a watershed in the field in bringing scientists back to consciousness. And also, I think, really introduced, I don't know if they used the expression at this point, but introduced the whole idea that we should be looking for the neural correlates of consciousness, which I think is carefully chosen to be a fairly neutral expression. You're neutral on a whole lot of the big philosophical questions, like, is consciousness itself a brain process? Is it reducible to something in the brain? Is it distinct from the brain? The correlate question, we can look for the neural correlate of consciousness, whether we are materialists or dualists, whatever our philosophical view is. At the same time, you might say, okay, well, it also brings out that there's a grander challenge in the background. That the neural correlate of consciousness was meant to be a pragmatic search. But I say, okay, well, there's correlation and there's explanation. Ultimately, we want to get beyond neural correlates of consciousness, hopefully to a full neural explanation of consciousness. But that starts to bring in the so-called the hard problem, which is the problem of explanation. Well, explaining things like behaviors and the difference between being awake and being asleep and being able to point to things and talk about them, those are the easy problems. The hard problem was always the problem of subjective experience. Why and how does all this processing in the brain give you the subjective experience of the mind and of the world? And I think, Christof, you totally recognized the hard problem, I think, in your original statement of the problem and deliberately set it aside, which is great. Of course, but when we first met at it was the first Tucson conference in 1994, we said, okay, I was like, okay, well, this is great, but let's not forget about the hard problem.
Dave, how many experiments have you ever conducted talking about hard and easy?
Many, actually, many. I've done, I've got empirical survey papers. I'm part of an adversarial collaboration now, designing and running experiments on the neural correlates. But it's fair to say, look, I actually, although I say let's not forget about the hard problem, for the purposes of this bet, we very deliberately set the hard problem aside. This bet is about the neural correlates of consciousness. I don't think Christof would have been so foolish to suggest that we were going to have solved the hard problem of consciousness by 2023.
I think scientists would take issue with the framing of finding the search for the neural correlates of consciousness as being the easy problem. Because it's not so easy, right? It's a hard, you should have said maybe the hard problem and the really hard problem, right?
Fair enough, and there's been a lot of different variations on this. Ned has the harder problem, and someone had the hardest problem, and it was always a little bit of a joke. The easy problems are only easy in the sense that we have a paradigm, a fairly standard paradigm for approaching them.
Then there's a hard problem of trying to get NIH to fund for it.
Yeah, exactly. We're working on that.
So tell me then about the how ASSC got started in the 1990s. Were you both involved in that, and what was the germination of that?
Christof was the second president of ASSC, and I think I was the first director for the first few years. It was after that first big Tucson
College, I think, right?
The first conference was Claremont in 1997. There was this Tucson conference in '94, which wasn't ASSC, which was a very important conference in the field, but after that conference, people thought we need a professional society, and maybe one focused around philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology. And I think there were endless discussions. Boy, I have email chains that go back, that go on for months about whether it should be an association or a society, whether it should have science in the title. But yeah, eventually we got things together, and actually in the early days it was Patrick Wilkin, Bernie Bars was the first president, Bill Banks, and they did an amazing job in getting that first conference together.
It's part of this collaboration, right?
So to present the results, I'm going to bring to the stage Lucia Melloni, and
This other philosopher.
this was her on the, or maybe it was a subset. I've been to some Tucson conferences, right? I think it's sort of the subset of the people who attend the Tucson conference kind of branched out and made this more scientifically focused consciousness conference.
We had a lot of arguments about this at the time. I favored, at that point, a unified approach. In retrospect, what's happened is there's a two-tier approach. This ASSC conference is focused mainly on philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology, and it's fairly close to the mainstream. And look, these have been amazing conferences. There have been so many great ASSC conferences. At the same time, there are other conferences out there stemming from the Tucson conference that take more of a let a thousand flowers bloom approach. I think it's appropriate to have both approaches, but ASSC has been absolutely central to the development.
Yeah, and I think, and the legitimizing of this field, because every field
Absolutely.
needs a society and a conference, and so that sort of was the burgeoning of this field, and so to take us back to now ASSC 2 in Bremen, Germany, I'm gonna introduce to the stage journalist Per Snaprud, who was there. Per can come to the stage as I announce him. He is the neuroscience editor at the Swedish popular magazine, which I'm going to attempt to pronounce as Forskning and Framsteg, and which sort of okay. And he wrote the definitive history of the bet. So you're here to you bear witness to this bet. So tell me, were you there that evening when they were out drinking? I mean, how did you witness this? Tell us.
It's so amazing to be here in this crowd, and so unlikely that these things have happened. I was there at the Bremen meeting, and I was a very young journalist then, and I understand that this
David Chalmers guy is somebody I should talk to. I try to set up interviews all the time. But finally I caught him early in the morning, and it turned out that he and Christof and some others had spent the night in a bar, and David hadn't slept. But he was really fresh in his mind, and went on talking about philosophical zombies and all these relevant things. And then I think we spoke for about an hour. You had so much patience with this stupid journalist. And then I said, like rounding up, I said, well, anything else? Did it happen anything interesting during the bar hopping? And then David said, we made a bet. Christof and I made a bet, so that was interesting. And then the years went on. This was in 1998. In 2017, I met David at a philosophy conference in Budapest. At some cocktail party there, I went up to him and asked, so how is it going with this bet? And David looked a little bit sad, and he said that, well, Christof and I, we met some months ago and talked about that, and we both realized that we had forgotten the terms of the bet. So don't make bets in bars in Bremen unless you take good records. But then I said to David that well, I'll go home and see if I can find some notes from that interview. And I don't know if you...
And did you found a recording? Am I correct?
I did.
Look, you have the cassette tape.
So this I found, digital. Yeah. Totally analog. And I also found a Sony Walkman. And it actually worked. And people think I'm a hoarder.
There are some benefits to hoarding.
I'm not. But so the cool thing was that I did listen to it. I found the relevant part of the interview where they specified what he and Christof had agreed upon.
Just hours before the interview.
So we have a clip of that audio, correct? We can play for you now.
We made a bet actually about it. We made a bet about the nature of the neural correlate of consciousness.
Yeah?
He thinks that it's going to be a small number of neurons with a certain set of intrinsic properties. That will be the neural, and we made the bet, in 25 years he thinks we'll have discovered the neural correlate of consciousness. We have a small number of neurons with characterized by a small set of intrinsic properties. Mm-hmm. And that will be it.
Well, what's your bet?
I said no, it won't happen. I think it's a very safe bet.
It's easy. Yeah, how much did you...
It was a big case of nice wine. We buy it now, and then it goes in 25 years to the winner.
And his theory was that the neural correlate of consciousness would be...
something simple, basically. A certain set of neurons characterized by a small list of intrinsic properties. I think we said less than 10.
Okay.
Less than 10 intrinsic properties, and this will be clear.
It will be clear.
Within 25 years, yeah.
Look, you got to believe, when you're young, you got to believe that things are simple.
More power to Christof. It was a bold bet, and science is all about making bold bets. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't.
But in terms of the terms, I think you loosened up a little bit over the years, and you said, like, you know, maybe it didn't have to be only 10, and so tell us where you're at now with that.
Well, actually working over this tape from Per, which is incredibly useful. I think, you know, there the terms are fairly clear, and that's here's a summary. Number one, within 25 years, we'll discover the neural correlate of consciousness. Number two, that'll be a set of neurons characterized by a small set of intrinsic properties, less than 10. Number three, this will be clear. There'll be a consensus, I take it, behind this view. Anyway, look, this is great, but I think, look, this was already a very generous bet for Christof to be making, going out on a limb. And in retrospect, all this about the intrinsic properties, the less than 10 intrinsic properties, maybe Christof didn't need to be committed that far. Look, if we built that commitment in today, then I think the bet would basically be a walkover, because Christof now believes it's not the intrinsic properties that matter. It's, you know, he's a fan of the idea that it's network properties that matter. It's information properties that matter. I think the intrinsic properties there are a bit of a leftover from DNA envy. Francis Crick always wanted the neural correlate of consciousness to be something like DNA.
No, for the record, there could still be intrinsic properties like dendritic action potentials, like potential, you know, quantum mechanical effects. There still could be a particular cell type that expresses a particular gene in particular part of the organelle. So there are all sorts of special properties that ultimately, I think, will constitute the NCC. But I'm gracious to you that you kept me some slack and just...
So in the interest of leveling...
clarity.
In the interest of leveling the playing field, we get rid of condition 2 to make it a bit more of a sporting bet here, which gets us to, within 25 years, we'll discover the neural correlate of consciousness, and this will be clear. So that is our bet for today.
Okay, but let's be fair. So since 1998, there has been some progress in this endeavor, right? So can you talk about some of the theories or some of the things that we have since 1998 come closer to understanding the neural signature of consciousness, and kind of where are we now?
Yes, so most certainly we now have techniques that allow us to detect the presence of consciousness in severely disabled patients. That's a freaking big deal, right? Because we have a patient there, they're behavioral unresponsive, and we can now sort of knock their skull and measure brain complexity, and can tell whether the patient is conscious or not. We know so that's probably the biggest pragmatic progress in the mind-body problem over the last, I don't know, decades, centuries.
And we have some theories that have developed over the years, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think what's one of the interesting things has actually been the combined development of theories and experimental techniques in synergy with each other. I mean, there have always been theories of consciousness around, but over the last 25 years, at least a number of these theories have really been elaborated in very significant detail. Most notably, perhaps, the two theories we're going to focus on tonight, global workspace and integrated information theory, along with a number of others. That's really happened kind of at the interface between philosophy and science in a very productive way, but at the same time, there's been the development of a whole bunch of really incredibly useful experimental techniques, which turn out to bear on these theories in super interesting ways. And there's always new experiments coming out that bear on these. So I think that's what actually puts us in such a nice position today with the adversarial collaborations which have been put forward to precisely experimentally test our leading theories of the neural correlate of consciousness. And those results, as far as I know, have not been unveiled. Tonight is going to be the first time that the full results of some of those experiments will be unveiled. So I kind of see that as the crucial test for this bet. If the results of those experiments go in such a way that one theory is fully vindicated and the other theory is fully challenged, then we're at least on the road towards clarify. Look, would it suffice? We'd have to argue about that, but that would at least put us on that road. That's why I think this ASSC conference, this adversarial collaboration, and this bet really make it a nice little juncture to review the progress we've made over the last 25 years.
It's all come together in sync, along with my birthday, so it's perfectly in harmony. But Christof, you're looking sort of skeptical, or...
No, I think we should emphasize that the one big thing that has changed, we have much more sophisticated instrumentation that we can do in humans, and we're beginning to have causal techniques that allow us to move from correlation to causation, right? Whether that's optogenetics or TMS or neurosurgeon's electrode, and that together with the development of powerful quantitative scientific theories, not just sort of abstract, but theories that make very specific prediction in space and time and which agent in the brain is involved. I think that's made a big difference. Is it going to be decisive enough? We'll have to wait.
It's a cliffhanger.
This evening.
Yep.
One interesting thing which has emerged, I think, over the last 25 years is a real kind of breakdown of many of the theories of consciousness into two broad camps, roughly really corresponding to two different visions of consciousness. One that tends to put the neural correlates of consciousness in the sensory areas of the brain, in the case of vision at the back of the brain. It corresponds to a view of consciousness where it's largely sensory and very rich and full of detail. And another kind of theory that ties consciousness to the frontal areas of the brain, towards the front of the brain, and prefrontal cortex usually, and ties consciousness more closely to cognitive processes like thinking and attention, and tends to have a vision of consciousness where it's relatively sparse. And that's actually become a debate quite distinct from some of those philosophical debates about the hard problem. That's become, nevertheless, a very salient debate in the field. And I see today, the results we're going to see today have the prospect of actually bearing experimentally on that big debate, which has become at the core of the field.
Which is progress. So maybe eventually, it was a conscious decision to make a search for the neural correlates of consciousness rather than the neural causes of consciousness.
Very much so.
Maybe we might potentially be moving toward that, the latter?
Even Descartes thought there were neural causes of consciousness, Even if the brain and the mind are distinct, the brain can cause the mind. What I would like ultimately is a neural explanation of consciousness. What's that? The NEC? That's already that acronym is taken, right?
But that's going to be more a philosophical problem. What we can all agree on, that there's going to be some causes and that we can manipulate those, whether those is using fancy Neuralink-like technology or other things, and so we can perturb the system and move away from mere correlation. And I think that's an essential step we have to take as scientists to truly understand consciousness.
Yeah, although one thing we're finding, I think, is even in the experimental work here, when it bears on these theories, there's no fully getting away from philosophy, because philosophy enters into interpretation of these experiments and exactly what they tell you about consciousness.
We need each other. Scientists and philosophers need each other. And Per, make
Some
sure...
of my best friends are philosophers.
My best friend's a neuroscientist.
I was going to say, Per, make sure you have your handy tape recorder ready for this evening's festivities post-show.
Yeah, maybe I'll sneak up on someone early tomorrow morning after the class.
You never know what will happen. And as we'll get into in part two, we'll get a little bit deeper into these theories and perspectives of understanding consciousness, that how it evolved from 1998 until present day. But before then, we're going to do a little musical interlude, right? So everybody thank Dave, Christof, So it's an honor for me to bring to the stage neuroscientist Joe LeDoux, who most of you know. Joe LeDoux.
So I just need to, whoever's running the clock, it's already at 3 minutes and 33 seconds. So reverse that, because we're not going to stop in 7 minutes. All right, so the Amygdaloids do homegrown original music about mind and brain, and specifically love songs about mind and brain. And we're going to start with one that features ideas from the two greatest philosophers of mind in history, René Descartes and John Lennon.
Sometimes I don't know, it is to be me. See your eyes staring at me, they're sharp as knives. What do they see? You can't see inside of me, inside of me. That's a place only I can be. My soul has passion, it's trying to feel, searching for desire. Nothing seems real. Will is weak, it's not very free. Nothing to get hung about, that's just the deal. You can't see inside of me, inside of me. That's a place only I can be. You can't see inside of me, inside of me. That's a place only I can be. So I am, feel so I must be. Sometimes I don't know, it's to be me. You can't see inside of me, inside of me. That's a place only I can be, only I can be, only I can be, only I can be.
Thank you. don't know what to do. My body wants you so. My mind says no. You said you'd always love me. To me you'd be true. You said you'd love me. To me you'd be true. Well, now you're gone. I'm down and blue. Well, now you're back. You want me again. Well, now you're back. You want me again. If I relent, losing it. I got a mind-body problem. Got a problem. I don't know what to do. Don't know what to do. I've got a problem. It's got a problem. I don't know what to do. Don't know what to do. My body wants to know. Mine says no, 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 no. I even tried religion to get over you. I even tried religion to get over you. But holy dualism couldn't solve my schism. You got me trembling and shaking. He's trembling, shaking. I'm craving you. He's craving you. I'm trembling and shaking. He's trembling, shaking. I'm craving you. He's craving you. I'm going to say I'm in pain. I've got a problem. Just a girl. Don't know what to do. I've got a problem. I don't know what to do. My body wants you so. My mind says no. Thank you. All right. If you look into my mind's eye, you will see the way that I cry deep inside in my mind's eye. We had love, it was good. You were there, you understood everything, yes, everything. Can't always trust what you think.
mind, whoa, yeah. My mind's eye was
Thank you. Good night.
We're going to take a closer look at the integrated information theory of consciousness and the global neuronal workspace theory of consciousness. So we're going to talk a little bit more detail about those, and we have people here to help us. We're going to have philosopher Dan Dennett, who's going to express his views on the search for the neural correlates of consciousness. Melanie Boly is going to help elucidate the integrated information theory of consciousness. We have Stan Dehaene, who's going to talk a bit about the global neuronal workspace theory. And then finally, we'll have Liad Mudrik, who's going to describe the experiment that we've been alluding to all night. So first up, though, I'm going to introduce Dan Dennett. Now, he unfortunately wasn't able to be here in person tonight because of health reasons, but he graciously recorded his commentary, which we'll watch in a minute. But Dan Dennett, as many of you might know, he is the director of the Center of Cognitive Studies and emeritus professor and Austin B. Fletcher Professor of Philosophy at Tufts University. He's the author of From Bacteria to Bach and Back, Consciousness Explained, which was formative for me when I first read it. That came out in 1991. And Darwin's Dangerous Ideas, as well as many other books. He's currently a member of the external faculty of the Santa Fe Institute and New College of Humanities in London. So give it up for Dan Dennett.
So here we are at the settling of the great Chalmers Koch consciousness wager at ASSC. I wish I could be there, but unfortunately, health issues preclude that. So I'm sending this message to you electronically by Zoom. Hello, let's switch, here we go. So this wager is about the neural correlate of consciousness and whether that's been discovered in the last 25 years. Well, there was no initial definition of consciousness that Koch and Chalmers agreed on, but there was a relatively explicit description of the NCC. Quoting from Chalmers, an NCC is a minimal neural system N, such that there is a mapping from states of N to states of consciousness, where a given state of N is sufficient, under condition C, for a corresponding state of consciousness. Now, that's what Chalmers said in 2000 to clarify what an NCC was. So now the wager. This is, I think, the official declaration of what the wager is. Within 25 years, we'll discover the neural correlate of consciousness, and this will be clear. The neural correlate of consciousness will be a set of neurons characterized by a small set of intrinsic properties less than 10. When Dave sent this to me a few days ago, he added a proviso. He said, to level the playing field at least a little on Friday evening, I'll probably allow the second sentence, which is a little too overburdened with commitments, to be dropped. So the key statement will be the first sentence. Within 25 years, we'll discover the neural correlate of consciousness, and this will be clear. Okay, well now why am I here to talk about this? Because I and Keith Frankish and a number of others, including now quite a few scientists working in the area, have said that there is a sense in which consciousness is an illusion. But what does that mean? What I've said again and again and again is that consciousness is real, it just isn't what you think it is. I went on to add, consciousness is more like fame than television. Fame is an interesting property. It is constituted by its sequelae. What does that mean? Well, my phrase for that is, and then what happens? You notice I'm wearing my and then what happens hat today. Dan Lloyd sent this to me the other day, and I decided it was the perfect headgear to wear on this occasion. And then what happens? Whoop, whoop. What happened there? Well, consider this. Gregor Mendel, Alan Turing, and George Floyd weren't famous until after their death. What they did happened at time t, for various t's, but their fame came later. It was a sequel to what they did or what happened to them. And the same thing is true of consciousness, or so I have claimed. And in Consciousness Explained, commenting on the book by Crick and Koch, I said they do not go on to ask themselves the hard question, and then what happens? That's the question you have to answer if you want to know what consciousness is. Now, here's a slide from a paper by Hoopy and Bain of 2015, where we see that this is a diagram of the NCC, and you see there's supposed to be a correlation between the conscious state and the neural state, and we have to screen out the upstream neural states and the downstream neural states, which don't count, because we want to get this is the neural correlate of consciousness across here. And they go on to say, from the point of view of the NCC project, these side issues are confounds. We don't want to, and we want to be able to screen them off. And my question is, well, do we really? Can we make sense of consciousness independently of those sequelae? So I want to consider another phenomenon that is perfectly real, but is constituted by its sequelae, and that's speciation. Is speciation real? Of course it is. We have millions of examples of speciation. The theory of natural selection is all about the origin of species. Speciation is a real phenomenon, no question about it. So imagine now the quest for the BCS, the biological correlate of speciation. That would be a wager that you might imagine would already be settled. But I want to point out to you that it isn't. You'll never find it by a temporally local examination. A Great Dane and a Chihuahua. Are they different species? Get out your microscopes, get out your DNA test kits, do what you like. Examining these two animals in microscopic detail, you will not be able to tell whether they are two species or one. Officially, at the moment, they're treated as varieties of a single species, Canis familiaris. But they don't, are they cross-fertile? Well, not naturally they are, for pretty obvious mechanical reasons. But could you make them cross-fertile? Interesting question, but not as an interesting scientific question. Or consider the herring gull and the lesser black-backed gull. Are those two species or one? As you go around the North Pole, you find that there are populations that are intermediate between the two, and it's only in the British Isles where there seem to be two different species that don't mate, they don't interact, they don't recognize each other as mating partners, but they are all related in this circle that goes around the Arctic Circle. There's some complications in that story. It's not as clean an example as we would like to have of a ring species, and that doesn't bother biologists. I want to look at another case. Here are the Andaman Islands off the Indian Ocean, inhabited by the Andaman Islanders, and on Cornwallis Island, way up above the Arctic Circle, we have Inuit that have been living there for many generations. Now, these are human populations. They're probably 30 to 50,000 years since they've had a common ancestor. Might they be two different species? Probably not. But who knows? Who knows whether we already have two species of Homo sapiens on the planet? Well, suppose they're not cross-fertile for one reason or another. Then we would say, well, I guess speciation occurred. But when did it occur? They haven't had any contact for 50,000 years, let's say. Did it occur before the pyramids were built or after the internet was built? And there is no non-arbitrary answer. You just ignore the question. It's not a legitimate question. Perfectly real phenomena need not have sharp spatio-temporal boundaries. Speciation is one example, fame is another, and so is consciousness. Now let's consider one more search. The North Pole is a perfectly real thing, but it is not what Christopher Robin thought it was. Here's the famous picture of Hu and Christopher Robin's great expedition to discover the North Pole. The North Pole wasn't what they thought it was, and I'm reminded of their triumphant declaration that in the same way, Christof and David Chalmers' wager is about a phenomenon which is perfectly real, but not what they think it is. Now, this is not a message of despair. This is a message, we've made tremendous progress in the last 25 years on what consciousness is. And we've got much better models now. And so those overcommitments that David spoke about loom larger and larger. So it doesn't really matter who wins the wager, because it's about a thing which is not what consciousness is in the first place. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is a friend and colleague, Melanie Boly. We first met many years ago at one of the ASSC conferences. I can't remember which one. She is awesome. I think we were out partying one night and we just started dancing, and then we became friends. She was at the time, I think, a young postdoc working in Belgium with Steve Lories. Was that right? PhD with Steve Lories. Now she is a board-certified neurologist in both Europe and the United States. She is an epileptologist, an assistant professor at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. Her work combines neuroimaging tools like functional MRI, high-density EEG, and intracranial recordings with the integrated information theory framework in the hope of developing new diagnostic tools and therapies for neurological patients, so with real practical implications. And it's a pleasure to introduce Melanie Boly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here to celebrate together. So I'm going to talk about integrated information theory, or IIT. Integrated information theory is rather unique because it starts from consciousness itself rather than from its behavioral, functional, or neural correlates. Also, what it tries to do is to account not only for the presence versus absence of consciousness, but also for its quality, for how it feels. The starting point of IIT are the essential properties of consciousness, those that are true of every experience. In short, every experience is intrinsic, specific, unitary, definite, and also structured. By structured, what we mean is, for example, here, with the face, the eyes, the nose, the particular contour of the face. These are phenomenal distinctions that are bound to a particular location in space through phenomenal relations. If we want to explain the quality of consciousness, we also need to account for these phenomenal distinctions and relations. Then, IIT translates these properties into physical terms. It says that the physical substrate of consciousness, called the main complex here in blue, should also satisfy these properties in physical terms. That is, it must have causes and effects that are intrinsic, specific, irreducible, definite, and also structured. That means one has to account for all the causes and effects within the main complex of all the subunits and how they relate to each other, how they overlap. And that yields to the cause-effect structure of the main complex with its causal distinctions and relations. In short, for IIT, all quality is structure. In fact, the heart of its research program is trying to account for different kinds of experiences in terms of corresponding cause-effect structures. By IIT, the feeling, which is really the meaning of every experience, is accounted for by a cause-effect structure with its causal distinctions and relations, and not, I want to emphasize, by activity patterns, neural processes, or neural codes. Our first attempt to show that IIT can account for the quality of experience as a structure was to try to explain why space feels the way it does, extended. We found that the properties of extendedness are exactly accounted for by the properties of cause-effect structures specified by grids, that is, topographical areas, topographically organized areas, that are typical in posterior cortex. Ongoing work is trying to account for why time feels like flowing, why faces and objects feel like general concepts bound to local features, and ultimately for colors and sounds. For a detailed exposition and mathematical formalism of IIT, I refer you to the latest exposition, IIT 4.0. Instead, let me focus on a few key points that are actually important for this adversarial collaboration. It follows from IIT that first, a dense 3D lattice of highly integrated and differentiated connections that are also highly overlapping is necessary to support conscious states. This type of connectivity is characteristics of many areas in the posterior cortex. And thus, by IIT, the posterior part of the brain is an excellent substrate for consciousness, unlike other substrates that are very modular, like the cerebellum. But the right anatomy is not enough. For example, during deep sleep or anesthesia, neurons in the posterior cortex may still be active, but if causal interactions are impaired, like we showed with TMS-EEG or intracranial recordings, then this substrate cannot support conscious states because it disintegrates in many small modules. So what is the role of prefrontal cortex for IIT? Well, first and most important, prefrontal cortex is not necessary for any content to become conscious, nor is there any need for information to be globally broadcasted or message passing. On the other hand, some prefrontal regions, if they have the right anatomy, may contribute some high-level properties of experience, such as abstract concepts. But many prefrontal regions may only contribute to cognitive functions, such as, say, task sequencing, and not to experience if they do not have the right anatomy. Now let me finish with the predictions of IIT for this adversarial collaboration. Prediction number 1 is the best decoding of conscious content should be from the main complex. Here, primarily encompassing posterior areas. This is because by IIT, only units in the main complex contribute to the quality of experience, and each subset of units contribute to unique content. For example, you would have subsets of units in higher order areas contributing the identity Mona Lisa or the category face, and in lower level areas, some local features like orientation. Accordingly, adding units outside of the main complex, like in prefrontal area, should not improve decoding, but rather quite possibly degrade it. Prediction number 2 is that decoding of conscious content should persist as long as the experience persists. This is because, for IIT, the experience, like here Mona Lisa, is identical to a cause-effect structure, and thus the cause-effect structure should persist as long as the experience does, like here, for example, for as long as we look at her. Finally, we predict synchrony between units specifying high and low level contents of experience, such as here, say, phase units and contour units. This is because in IIT, contents of experience such as phase, here in blue, or contours, low-level features like contours, here in greens, are substructured, which are themselves bound by relations, overlaps between causes and effects. And these relations in the brain should typically be reflected by synchrony in firing patterns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. So that's contender number 1, IIT in this corner. And next up, we have contender number 2, Global Neuronal Workspace Theory. And to elucidate that, we are going to have Stan Dehaene. He is a French psychologist and cognitive neuroscientist. He holds a chair of experimental cognitive psychology at the Collège de France in Paris and directs the Neurospin Center in Saclay, south of Paris, France's Advanced Brain Imaging Research Center. Now, Stan, together with his colleagues, was the team that introduced, developed, and tested experimentally the global neuronal workspace theory of conscious processing. And he and his team used brain imaging to probe the depth of subliminal processing and to identify the neural correlates of minimal contrasts between conscious and non-conscious stimuli. He reviewed the field in multiple papers and in his book, Consciousness and the Brain, which I highly recommend, good book. And Stan is here now to elucidate the global neuronal workspace theory of consciousness. Welcome, Stan, to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Bonsoir. It's very nice to be here. What a crowd. It's incredible. It's also an anniversary for me, because 25 years ago I published my first 2 papers on consciousness. One was the beginning of the theory, and the other was my first Nature paper studying unconscious processing. And so I always had this wonderful luck to be working, first of all, with extraordinary colleagues, many of whom are in this room, helped develop both the theory as well as the empirical support, and generated some of these iconic pictures that you see today. What's the theory about? Well, first of all, I want to say one thing, is that it says very clearly that consciousness is just a computational property. The brain is an information processing device, and consciousness is just one type of information processing, which could occur in other machines. In any machine, it's very easy now that we have a science of computation to understand what's unconscious computations. It's a bit harder to imagine what is conscious computation, but I would claim that there are at least 2 levels. One is that there is a need for machines such as the brain to share information, to broadcast information. There is a need for a global routing system, and that's what we call conscious access. And in higher level machines, there's a need for conscious self-representation. The system needs to learn to represent itself and needs to have a self-monitoring system. And I see nothing impossible in machines to have that. So the Global Workspace theory is specifically about the notion of conscious access. It was developed by Jean-Pierre Changeux and myself, and then with Lionel Nakache. And it was based on prior proposals in a cognitive psychology domain by Bernard Baars. And the idea is that, first of all, we have to respect how deep is unconscious processing in the brain. Many, many processes, if not all of the processes in the brain, process information non-consciously in change. And the consciousness is really the tip of the iceberg. But what we subjectively experience as consciousness is the global availability of information. It's, according to the theory, corresponds to the activity of a global neuronal workspace that evolved to select and broadcast information in a brain-wide manner. It selects a piece of information and sends it to other areas and shares it. And so conscious access in the theory and in our simulations corresponds to the ignition of a subset of neurons, which we call workspace neurons, that are supposed to be distributed in many areas, including prefrontal cortex. But I insist this is not a localizationist theory of consciousness. And their topology, their vector, defines the conscious contents. And the idea is that there are top-down signals that are broadcasted that synchronize and share this information, make it available to what would otherwise be modules in the brain. So the main predictions, what's common to all conscious processing states, even though they could be very varied, is this idea of long-range ignition, a bout of metastable activity lasting for at least 100, 200 milliseconds, which broadcast information synchronizes distant processes. What I like about this theory is it's making very clear connection to experiments, many sorts of experiments. So the first thing that it does is it creates a typology of non-conscious processes. And of course, there could be non-conscious, non-active processes in the brain, but even if you consider brain activity, you could have subliminal stimuli that die out before they can create this ignition, but you could also have pre-conscious stimuli that would be sufficient for conscious experience were it not for existence of competing processes. So inattention is one key factor in not being aware of other things. So what happens, of course, for the stimulus in green, which makes it into the global workspace, is, first of all, the same sort of non-conscious accumulation of evidence than for a pre-conscious stimulus, but then the second process of nonlinear ignition. So we really predict, and I was so pleased to see Doris Tsau's work yesterday, we already predict a biphasic profile of neural activity with 2 stages, only the second one of which corresponds to consciousness. There is this idea that ignited global workspace neurons which are inside prefrontal cortex, but not limited to prefrontal cortex, would contain a neural code for any conscious content, not just perceptual content, by the way. So we need to be able to account for what happens when you become aware of making an error. For instance, just realize what you made an error. And with Lucy Charles, we did some work on that, showing there's a gain and ignition. And this must be the 16 times that I must be giving this talk, right? There's a very complex thought. So part of the theory is that humans have developed an inner language in order to express such thoughts, but still they must be represented inside the global workspace. Finally, there is this idea, and it's the most important one, I think, for tonight's data, that conscious activity is late, 200, 300 millisecond minimum, and can be temporally decoupled from the external world. Can be drastically delayed relative to stimulus onset. For instance, when we do a dual task, we are drastically delayed in perceiving a stimulus because we are distracted by another task. Claire Sergent developed this retro-cueing paradigm, which shows this very clearly. But vice versa, if a stimulus is long gone, we can hold it in consciousness. It's a working memory system as well. The global workspace and working memory are very close to each other. The consciousness is like the entry into working memory, and then we can discard or keep the stimulus. And finally, it need not be sustained through a long stimulus. And I think this is clearly against what Melanie was just showing. It's not because you have a stimulus in front of your eyes and you're looking at it that you're conscious of it. We've learned that there can be a lot of non-conscious processing, and that even a gorilla in the middle of the stage may be missed, if you're fascinated by my talk, for instance. I guess I won't have time to show you what I wanted to show you, which is that there is beginning to be quite a lot of evidence for that. First of all, I was so happy when this concept of ignition, which was really a theoretical concept, became alive in many experiments, including this one, where a dim flash of light creates or does not create an ignition in prefrontal cortex, whereas the activity in the posterior area is really not sufficient to account for conscious perception here. Or a second set of experiments, this is one that we are doing in the lab with Fanis Panagioteropoulos and colleagues. If you record from enough neurons, from just a few tens of neurons in prefrontal cortex, according to the theory, you should be able to decode every sort of conscious content that goes through the mind. And that's what we're finding in a monkey here, that if you present a sequence, and there is a sequence pattern, well, every single aspect of what goes into your mind, the identity of the pictures, the number of the picture, 1, 2, 3, 4, the change in the picture, the last one is different. The idea that there is a pattern to the sequence, it's A, B, and the pattern is different from before, it's different from expected. All of these are conscious thoughts, and they are represented in prefrontal cortex. And I think there's more and more evidence for vector codes that correspond to the richness of our experience in prefrontal cortex. And finally, but I think we'll discuss that for the experiments, there is more and more evidence for temporal decoupling. And I want to pay homage here to my colleague Sébastien Marty, who died way too early. He was a wonderful colleague and member of this association. And Sébastien was able to show that when you do dual tasking, the first task is online with the stimulus, but the second task can be dramatically delayed and decoupled. So it's not because you are presenting a stimulus that you are conscious of it, and you're not aware of this delay. You can be dramatically delayed and not know it. Consciousness is decoupled from the external world. And even during mere watching, this is an unpublished experiment I would love to detail for you, but you're just watching a head rotating on the screen for 5 seconds. Decoding occurs only at the beginning of the stimulus, and then, of course, you can think of something else. You're not tied to this particular stimulus. Consciousness can detach itself. And however, when the stimulus disappears behind the screen, you need to be able to refresh your working memory, and then you can decode it again. This is actually a very fascinating finding, and we should really get it published, but the loss of Sébastien made it difficult. But you can see here that when the stimulus disappears, you can decode whether it's a face or an object, even though there is nothing on screen anymore, just because you're refreshing your memory. So memory is all, consciousness is all about refreshing this mental representation in the workspace. So I'll finish with just this slide to say what is really at the heart of the theory. Consciousness is an internal workspace for autonomous reflection, decoupled from the contingencies of external stimuli. Thank you very much.
Beautiful, right? It's hard to choose. We'll let the data decide. So Now I'm going to bring to the stage Liad Mudrik. She is a researcher at the School of Psychological Sciences and Segal School of Neuroscience at Tel Aviv University. Her research focuses on conscious experience and its neural mechanisms and functions. She completed not one, but 2 PhDs at the Tel Aviv University in both cognitive psychology and in philosophy. She then continued a postdoctoral fellowship at the California Institute of Technology, working in Christof Koch's lab, before returning back to Israel and opening her own lab. And in 2019, she was selected as a member of the Young Israeli Academy of Sciences. She's also a Tannenbaum Fellow of the CFAR Brain, Mind, and Consciousness Program. And she's here to describe the cogitate experiment that we're all waiting to hear the results about.
Thank you. Hi. So first of all, what an evening. I must say that just to be on the stage with this group of people is for me like mind-blowing. So thank you. I'm hoping that the slides are going to come up, and please don't take the time before they are, because that won't be fair. So I should click on it and then? Okay, let's try. Oh, perfect, sorry. So you can take the time, it's my fault. So the Cogitate Consortium, which is what I'm here to talk about, we just heard these 2 theories, and you all agree, I think, that they are very, very different from one another, although they are supposed to explain the very same thing. So how can that be? One reason might be that the 2 theories have been progressing in parallel, with each theory gaining more and more empirical support over time, and this is what Itai Yaron has shown in the Cogitate, contrast database. You're all welcome to explore it yourselves. And the field at large has been more focused in providing supporting evidence than providing challenging evidence. And so we can ask ourselves, what is the way to make progress? As we know that science progresses not only by confirming theories, but also by challenging them. And a possible solution, as we've heard, is adversarial collaboration, first championed by Daniel Kahneman, who's here with us this evening, suggesting that maybe if the 2 proponents of the theories work together to push each other and find contradicting and different predictions and experiments, then we might be able to make some progress in the field. And this is what the Cogitate Consortium is all about. And for me personally, it started with this relatively innocent email from David Podgierter and Christof Koch, who invited us to join this workshop, which took place in 2018, where basically the idea was to sit around a table with the proponents of the theories, some unaffiliated researchers and philosophers, and think together about ways where we could test the theories. And these were, first sketches on the whiteboard of predictions, which turned out to be 2 experiments that were initially kind of conceived, and then we developed them into full-fledged, pre-registered experiments with the expected outcome, with the predictions, and what we think they would mean for the theories. And we even had Stan and Giulio sign these letters confirming, this is just zooming in on Stan, but they're identical, that the experiments that are proposed are suitable to test the theories, and that the outcomes will indeed be able to support or challenge the theories. So before, and then the next stage was to collect the data, mind you, with COVID in the background, and we chose to do so in 3 different techniques, fMRI, MEG, and IEEG, with the idea being that we want to have a strong test with converging evidence from different techniques, so we're not limited by the specifics of one neuroscientific technique, and we could get confirmation from the different techniques with many, many subjects, creating a very big and large data set. Now, with the first third of this data set, we then perfected and improved our analysis methods so that we actually give the theories the best chances to find evidence for their predictions. And we really spent a lot of time to do that in order to make not only positive results meaningful, but also null results meaningful. And then we pre-registered again, so we amended the pre-registration. Everything is open science and can be seen by the community, and tested these analyses and predictions on the remaining 2/3 of the data. And this is where we are today, and I'm glad to say that in this very day we submitted the paper and put it as a bioarchive so you could all see it. So that's quite a moment for us. But it's not the final story, because there is still the second experiment, and then we will have to integrate the results of the 2 experiments because they complement each other. So the story, that's not the end. The bet, maybe we'll have to reconvene in a year to see what we find at the next ASSC. So before I continue, I just want to acknowledge the people behind this work. So this has been a huge challenge, and the team has been extraordinary. And I specifically want to single out the postdocs and students, and you can clap your hands for them, who worked fearlessly on this project. It really is not trivial to spend so much time on a group team science effort, and also, of course, the PIs. And I want to also acknowledge Michael Pitts. So Lucia and I are on stage today, but he's been, of course, an equal member of this trio managing this project and leading it, and Tanya Brown. So both of them, again, we couldn't have done it without him. So, the experiments. So we have two experiments. First, an overview. The first experiment asks two questions. One is, what mechanisms underlie the multifaceted aspects of consciousness, and irrespective of the task. So this is very important. We want to get at pure perception and not task-related processes. But also, how is a percept maintained over time? The second experiment, which again you'll hear about hopefully next year, is all about seen versus unseen stimuli, but using a very cool video game which we developed in order to be able to suppress the visibility of highly salient stimuli that are presented on the screen. But we are focusing on the first experiment. So this is the Mona Lisa, you just saw it. As Melanie told us, when we see it, we capture many aspects of it. So this is exactly the type of thing that we want to do also in our experiment. We have different stimuli, and we then manipulate the categories. So we have 4 different categories. We manipulate the orientation, much like the Mona Lisa is directed at one direction. We want to see how this is represented. We manipulate the identity by having different stimuli, and also the duration over which the stimulus is presented, and task relevance. So to show you how this looks like, how we manipulate task relevance, at the beginning of the trial, we identify 2 targets, and the participants are supposed to just press a button whenever they see them. And then we present clearly visible stimuli for different durations. No one can argue that this is not consciously perceived by the participants, but some of them are task relevant because they belong to the same category as the targets, and some are task irrelevant. So you know that you don't really have to look and see whether this is a target or not. So then that allows us to test 3 predictions. Let's go over them one by one. I'll explain in a bit, and also another analysis that allows us to pinpoint the areas that are related to conscious perception rather than just the task. So first, the contents of consciousness. We are asking where in the brain will we find information not only on one aspect of the Mona Lisa or the stimuli that we present, but all aspects of conscious perception, because this is what is supposed to be the mechanism that underlie our perception. And then for G and W, the prediction is that we will find that information in many areas, but the controversial one that differentiates between the theories is the PFCs, the prefrontal cortex. For IIT, as we've heard, the prediction is that we find maximal decodability of content in posterior areas. Second, the maintenance of perception over time. How does the brain allow us to perceive something over a determined amount of time? So here we have, for G and W, an onset and offset response. So the idea is that there will be an ignition when the stimulus starts, or when we start perceiving it, and another ignition marking its offset. While for IIT, as we've heard, they predict a sustained activity or representation of the information throughout the perception itself. Finally, the synchronization patterns. So for G and W, the prediction is that high-level visual areas decoding the content, like FFA for faces or LOC for objects, will be synchronized or show interareal connectivity with prefrontal cortex. But for IIT, the prediction is that this synchrony should be found with visual areas that are part of the posterior Holt zone. So just to conclude, we can now combine all these predictions, all these tests, into a much larger one that allows us to integrate over them and put the theories to the test. So the Cogitate Consortium now gives us, besides the open science and the unique data set that it does, also the ability to have converging evidence over tests, over techniques, as we've seen, over samples. So we have the first third and then the second 2/3 of the data, over different labs all over the world, in different continents even, and over populations. So we hope that this will indeed make a definite test. And now you're all ready to hear about the results, but it won't happen yet, because we first hear some music and then we'll get Lucia on stage and get them. Thank you.
So now the stage is set. You're all waiting with bated breath. It's just the perfect time to get some entertainment. And it's my pleasure to introduce Baba Brinkman, who I know pretty well, but I'll use my notes. Baba is a rapper and science communicator, originally from Vancouver, Canada. He's won multiple awards, is best known for his Rap Guide series and albums and plays, including most recently his Rap Guide to Consciousness, which was written and with scientific consultation by both Neil Seth, the University of Brighton, Sussex, right? Sussex in Brighton, and myself. And he's going to, in the show, he explores various concepts from neuroscientific theories of consciousness in the form of comedy and rap. You think Hamilton for science. It premiered at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2017 and played off-Broadway in 2018 and 2019. And tonight, Baba will be performing two songs from the Rap Guide to Consciousness. One is about integrated information theory and the effects of psychedelics on the brain. And the other one is about the evolutionary pathways through which conscious capacities are acquired developmentally. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Baba Brinkman.
Integrated information theory and psychedelics. Don't do drugs at home. Go to the aquarium. I had a conversation with a cephalopod sipping on psilocybin. We integrated information. A skeptic would call it anthropomorphizing. Just a bloody reductivist busting the bubble of a panpsychic. But I swear to God, that octopus was conscious, y'all. We was vibing. Damn, look at those eyes, look at those legs, baby. Tell me, what is you thinking? People call me Baba Brinkman, and I'm tripping from this mushroom tea I'm sipping. Who am I? Just another Homo sapien. We're the last in a long line of hominids. And it's been a long time since one of us had a common ancestor with an octopus. Look at you, you're a living alien. I'm like Amy Adams in Arrival, not as attractive, but just as passionate about the planet's survival. And I want to know, how could you be so good at problem solving and camouflaging when your brain is small, but your semi-autonomous arms have 2/3 of all your neurons in them? It's like that theory of consciousness they call integrated information that says any system is conscious if it's connected up and differentiated. It's got that mathematical figure called phi that's quantifiably calculated as a measurement of how much a whole is greater than the sum of the parts when they're isolated. And you probably couldn't calculate it yourself because you've only got 8 legs, but you can think of it as a measurement of redundancy, like the compression that makes JPEGs. And you understand compression, don't you? Yeah, you fit through soda bottle heads. No bones about it, just viscous organs, tentacles, and a little bit of cartilage. The thing is, if this theory is right, and I can't say if it's right because I'm tripping hard, but if it's right, there might be something it's like to be an octopus's arm, a subjective tentacle perspective, you know, like a mind that you would have 9 of. And when you swim in a straight line, I guess those minds, line up and you combine them? You must think I'm a serious hippie, but it's not me. The theory is trippy. It's got multi-dimensional crystals distilling experiences mysteriously, and phi is incalculable, unrelatable. Even a worm has a phi of 10 to the power of 468 or so. So how much phi do you and I get? This theory is panpsychic. Is the universe really conscious, or is it just the psilocybin that I did? I'm trying to stay open-minded. Consciousness is unified and can't be divided, but when I'm high, the temporal signal diversity gets elevated inside it. So check out the magnetoencephalographic charts. My signal is off. My uncompressible thoughts got me tripping and talking to cephalopods. I had to go home and sleep that shit off. Later I came back to see my 8-legged friend, and the aquarium staff told me that she already laid eggs and was dead. But I still had a conversation with a cephalopod sipping on psilocybin. We integrated information. A skeptic would call it anthropomorphizing. Just a bloody reductivist busting the bubble of a panpsychic. But I swear to God, even its freaking arms were conscious, y'all. We was vibing. Thank you. AI and psychedelics are the same. All right, this next one is going to be a bit about the definition of consciousness. Where do we start it, right? Is it like a spectrum? Is it like a dimmer switch? Or is it an all or nothing phenomenon? We can identify instincts that we have about different animals and robots potentially and how much consciousness each of them have, and we want to find a place where it starts. So I want to look at where you think consciousness starts by examining one of the most manipulative and deceptive organisms in the natural world. A human baby. Look at me, not him. You know the feeling when you're chilling like a villain, dealing with no stress, like a room with no ceiling, just open. And you like the rhyme illin so much you name your first son Dylan. That's the feeling I felt November 12th when I first held Dylan and fell under his spell. That was 3 days after the election from hell, when the Trump cartel captured Winterfell. Y'all remember that feeling? Just ill and disgusted with political dribble on Twitter from Trumpkins telling us the civic discussion is critically busted. Y'all know that feeling? Well, Dylan doesn't. What's it like to be a human baby? Just a blooming, buzzing confusion, maybe? I look in his eyes and try to read his thoughts and find myself wondering whether he's got them or just sensations, chaotic and messy. I want to relate. Should I take some LSD so I can stop thinking and just exist? I mean, look at the kid. Ignorance is bliss. You know that feeling when you find the right words to express your thoughts, connect and get heard? Y'all know that feeling? You know the feeling. Animals don't though, and neither does Dylan. You know the feeling of bladder control when you don't even go when you have to go? Who knows that feeling? Yeah, even dogs know that feeling, but not Dylan. Dylan doesn't know the feeling of regret or anticipation of future stress. Is he conscious? Yes, or maybe not just yet. There could be several different levels of consciousness. Does he have a subjective perspective? I guess so. Is it like a fish though, or like a gecko? I mean, the kid started out as a single cell about a year ago. And don't call it a miracle, call it a triumph of modern medicine. Dylan was an excellent IVF specimen. I know because he spent a month in a freezer so we could do research and check his genes first. Sometimes evolution needs a boost, and it worked too. He's so cute. But when does he begin to be a mental self? I've seen a picture of him at 100 cells, and I wondered, when does consciousness emerge? At the nematode level, or like a worm? I mean, I was still a proud dad though when the kid had gills and a tail like a tadpole. You know the feeling when you comprehend and solve a problem that was trying to box you in? Who knows that feeling? You know the feeling. Animals don't though, and neither does Dylan. You know the feeling when you want to suck a boob so bad that nothing but a nipple's gonna do? Who knows that feeling? Yeah, hetero men, lesbians, and Dylan. Baby mammals, they're so beguiling. Dylan's got skills, right? Eating, smiling, babbling a little bit of call and response, communicating all of his needs and wants. But that doesn't mean he knows what he's doing. Planning, considering, executing. Yeah, Dylan's got reasons to do stuff, but are they his reasons or evolutions? A cuckoo chick doesn't laugh or cry. It focuses on host chick and fantaside. And if Dylan was a Barbary macaque, he'd be clinging instinctively to mama's back. Yeah, it's easy to anthropomorphize the mind of an animal, but evolution is blind and thinking is costly. A baby bird doesn't need it to get its mama defeated, and Dylan doesn't need to reflect on his cuteness to recruit parental contributions. All he needs to do is goo-goo and ooh-cha. Resistance is futile. You know the feeling when you make a whole plan in your mind, strategize and revise and adapt. Y'all know that feeling? You know the feeling. Animals don't though, and neither does Dylan. You know the feeling when you're lost in a memory, daydreaming off in a thoughtful reverie. Who knows that feeling? Yeah, you and me see eye to eye, but not Dylan. Thank you. And that's how you diss your newborn for 4 straight minutes. All right, I'm gonna do one more quick piece. I came with 2 songs prepared, and I wrote the third one in the last 90 minutes to summarize the discussion so far. So here we go. This is my wrap-up of the night, precluding the grand finale that's coming. All right, check it out. Consciousness. We're in search of the neural correlates. We pinpoint the activation. We look for those clear coordinates. Place your bets, your cards on the table. Show your poker chips. Probe the brain. See the way that the circuits form in it. The neural correlates. I'm talking the NCCs. Which one of you is the audience? Not the empty seats. It's an aggregate effect, right? Check the evidence we need. Find the NCCs. Resolve the bet and proceed. That's the chorus. Resolve the bet and conquer, or at least conquer one question, right? The question of whether we have yet conquered the easy problems, not the hard problem of Dave Chalmers. Forget the hard problem, y'all. Let's not make this shit awkward. Christof and Dave made the bet up in a drunken raucous. They set the very specific terms down and then they promptly forgot them. Thank God they managed to get their words backed up on a freaking Sony Walkman by Mr. Per Snaprud. The terms are stacked up. Let's find those NCCs, just a few neurons with less than 10 intrinsic properties. It's gotta be clear with a consensus that's true. And lucky for Christof, Dave decided to strike clause 2. Woo! However many properties, the question is how do they crisscross to produce a conscious percept? Where is the beef, Christof Koch? Scientific investigation about to take the place of 2,400 years of philosophical stale debates? Christof was like, Dave, how many experiments have you run? Don't talk about easy problems unless you're able to do one. And Dave was like, whoa, come on, easy, brother. Philosophy and neuroscience are besties. We need each other. Philosophy sets the stage, and science can fill the void to get the soundtrack of Joe LeDoux and the Amygdaloids and help us get us all working. So let us begin, guided by the host with the most. Make noise for Heather Berlin. Dylan is growing up to be quite conscious. Heather is his mom, if you didn't know. But it's like consciousness in search of the neural correlates, pinpoint the activation. Yeah, just look for the clear coordinates, place your bets, put your cards on the table, show your poker chips, probe the brain and see the way that the circuits form in it. The neural correlates, I'm talking the NCCs. Which of you is the audience? Don't look to the empty seats. It's just an aggregate effect. Check the evidence we need. Find those NCCs. Resolve the bet and proceed. Like, yo, ladies and gentlemen, we've experimented in an adversarial collaboration, and yup, it was funded by Templeton, so let's rock. Kick it off on a very loud mic like Ned Block and find the holiest of holies. Keep the discoveries rolling with Melanie Boly. Integrated information is a hell of a story, but I won't recap it because that's a story with the psychedelic octopus. Shit, I already told it, but with the psychedelics, I mean, come on, we're tripping to the music, making me feel like consciousness is a hallucinated illusion. So let the rap set it. Call me the lyrical Dan Dennett. First I rap, and then what happens? Answer the question. Do I stick in your brain and try to achieve a state of inner fame, like the image of a chihuahua trying to get it on with a Great Dane? Or do my rap lyrics fade, washing every impression away in the neurological melee? Cause it's all about the sequelae, the flow of experience, images, words so Shakespearean. So let's define what the global neuronal workspace theory is. Consciousness, an information processing game that spans the brain, broadcasting information. Ask Stan Dehaene on consciousness. It is first base, it activates in the first place because it gets broadcast in that global neuronal workspace. Consciousness can be explained with little effort. Subliminal signals broadcast for a couple of 100 milliseconds. Ignition and perception broadcasted when we're sharing it, and that's how we become aware of it. It becomes part of our narrative, so let's go get it. Put those theories up in the cage match and let the scientific method dig in and then brain track. I don't know what's gonna happen at this moment in time while I'm speaking this rhyme. Who is gonna win that case of wine? The future unfolds in our heads like songs in a piece of music. A book with the forward written moments ago like Liad Mudrik. So let's learn about the outcomes of the bet. Follow the cogitate, resolve it, and find the keys to human consciousness. Consciousness, come on, y'all. We're in search of the neurocorrelates. Pinpoint that activation. Look for the clear coordinates. Place your bets. Get your cards on the table. Show your poker chips. Probe the brain and see if you can find the circuits forming in it. The neurocorrelates. Looking for the NCCs. Which of you is the audience? Don't look to the empty seats. It's an aggregate effect. So check the evidence we need. Find those NCCs. Resolve the bet and proceed. Are you ready for section 3? Thank you very much.
All right, give it up for Baba Brinkman. All right. Now that's a talent, a unique talent. So I want to say, just for the record, that our son Dylan is very much conscious at this point. He's 6 years old, he's going to 2nd grade, and as you can see, his consciousness eventually emerged. When exactly, we don't know. But now that's my gratuitous pictures of my son, I'll just leave them up for a minute. In part 3 of our program, we're gonna take a closer look at the results of the Cogitate experiment and see how the key predictions in IIT and Global Neuronal Workspace theory have fared in the experimental test. Now, I was fortunate enough to be at this original Templeton Foundation meeting back in March of 2018 at the Allen Institute in Seattle, along with this illustrious group. As you can see, Dave's weirdly not in any of the pictures except for the group one. That's because he's taking them all. So that's his perspective right there. That's the consciousness. What is it like to be a Dave Chalmers? It's right there. And we, over the course of days, we basically painstakingly debated and mapped out the perimeters of this study, which is now 5 years in the making. And 5 years later, we get to finally see the results. And we'll discuss what those results mean, and maybe even see if a crate of wine is exchanged. So to present the results, I'm going to bring to the stage Lucia Melloni. And this was her on these are all taken on those few days of that original meeting. And she's now the head of the Neural Circuits, Consciousness and Cognition Research Group at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics in Frankfurt, and a research professor in the Department of Neurology at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. She spearheads this novel approach to advance scientific discoveries on the neural basis of conscious perception, resting on adversarial collaboration in open science. It unites for the first time scientists from contemporary disciplines, complementary disciplines, with a common goal to arbitrate between established theories on consciousness, and provides an example for a powerful and well-orchestrated interdisciplinary project. It combines multiple imaging and electrophysiological approaches in a rigorous, large-scale project spanning multiple labs across the globe. And it's been described recently by Lucia and her colleagues in the leading journal Science, and she is here to present the long-awaited Cogitate results. So welcome to the stage.
All right, so first of all, I want to say that it's not just me. So even though Heather said that, it's just, I spearheaded this, interestingly, it was mostly David Podgitter, who is not here. But, we all say hi to him, and thank you for, allowing us to do this. What is interesting is that I come from the Max Planck Institute. And Max Planck said that science advances a funeral at a time. That was his motto. Perhaps adversarial collaborations are a way to not to have to do that. And this is what we thought, it was, perhaps we can embark on a different way. And this has been a trip of 5 years, and it's really interesting, and I think that it's chilling for all of us to be here today, because I think that for most of us, I think that we never anticipated that this was going to be that hard. And I think that I must admit that we were a little bit naive, as Liad called it, and at moments, especially when COVID actually hit, We thought that this was never going to happen, or at least I thought. But we were determined, and this is because we had incredible students who made this happen. So I really want to have a really huge shout out to them before we hear the results. All right, so as this is a team enterprise, let's start with the first prediction. As we heard from Liad, the first question that we ask is where in the brain we will find signatures of decoding or content of consciousness. And we ask the question a little bit more specific. We say, where can we actually find information about category, in this case, faces versus objects, but also about orientation? Because if you see me like this, I am Lucia, right? If you see me like that, I am Lucia as well, but I hope that you see me differently, right? All right, so then the question was, where are we going to find these two properties in the brain? So we ran Aya, in this case, you see her there. We ran 73 subjects in fMRI, and she looked for decoding through searchlight approaches. And what you see here are areas in the brain that light up, so to speak, or where there is decoding maximal, for faces versus objects. And as you can see, there is areas in posterior cortex and as well as areas in prefrontal cortex, both in both places. So you can actually say here is a draw, right? There is areas in prefrontal cortex and there is areas as well in posterior cortex. What happens, interestingly, when we then look at orientation? Something interesting happened. We actually found mostly areas in posterior cortex that contains information about orientation, but not, in this case, areas in prefrontal cortex. And one may ask, well, it's fMRI, so perhaps there is something, it doesn't have temporal resolution, so let's just try to test this with different techniques. So based on this test, we could say, well, it seems that there is no decodability in prefrontal cortex of orientation and category. That's important. It's the and that actually makes it red, right? Whereas in posterior cortex, there is decodability of category and orientation. What happens now if we actually look at patients that have epilepsy and they have electrodes implanted in their brain, right? And now we actually have a little bit better precise temporal resolution as well as better, a very good also spatial resolution. And what you can see here are maps of decoding as well in patients with epilepsy. They are all projected into the right brain. And you can see here as well, again, that when we decode category and category, we find information in posterior cortex as well as in prefrontal cortex. Right? Just to demonstrate that this is the richness of this data set, because we can demonstrate that both in fMRI and in intracranial recordings, we have exactly the same set of results. That definitely is remarkable. Now, what happens when we actually look for orientation, again, of decoding of faces? This is only about face orientation. We mostly find it in posterior areas and not in prefrontal cortex. So based on that, we could say, well, in the second test, if we actually look at now intracranial recordings, that there is, again, no decodability of category and orientation. Again, I want to highlight that this is what makes it red. But we actually find decodability in posterior cortex. Now, what happens when we looked at, you may say, well, the problem is that we are looking at patients that have epilepsy. So that's a brain that is somewhat altered, right? So what happens when we now ask for subjects that are neurotypical, we put them in an EMG, this kind of like a huge, ways in which you can record your brain, but it's non-invasive, right? So it's not the same as when you actually have an electrode in the brain. You can find here again, which is very important, a cross-classification of, when you actually go from task-relevant to task-irrelevant, which I forgot to mention, so which actually makes it very, very, very difficult. It's a cross-classification in this case. And we find it in posterior cortex as well as in prefrontal cortex for category. Now, interestingly, in EMG, we actually find posterior decoding of orientation as well as in prefrontal cortex, which is something we did not find in any of the techniques before. One may say, why? One of the reasons why we think that this may actually happen, and we discuss in the paper, is that there might be technical limitations of EMG. And that's why we say, we consider the results that we had before, with this might not be not equally strong evidence. But on the formal test, it passes. So what is the outcome of the first prediction? We could say, well, in terms of decoding, IIT passes, whereas we find only information for category in prefrontal cortex, but not for orientation. All right. So what happens now with prediction number 2, maintenance of conscious content? As Liad mentioned, we actually have two predictions. So one is, what is the temporal representation of the information in prefrontal cortex as well as in posterior cortex? And for GNW, the idea is that they would have an ignition at the beginning and an ignition at the offset of the stimulus. For IAT, in contrast, this representation should be sustained. And it's not only that the representation, the activation should be sustained, but the information as well, and that's a really important case, should also be sustained. And it should be information about category, identity, and orientation, right? So now the test is even stronger, right? Because you really want them, all of them, right? So when you see the Mona Lisa, you see the Mona Lisa, and not me, I hope. When you have the orientation and as well as the category, right? So now let's see what happens when we looked at posterior cortex in this case. We find that there is, in this case, a set of, there's a number of electrodes, in this case 12, that respond selectively to phases, in this case, and they have sustained responses all throughout the duration of the stimuli. So if it is 500 milliseconds or a second or a second and a half, it actually tracks the whole stimulus. And some of these cells that do it selectively, like Doris showed, and some of those doesn't. So they just respond to all of the stimulus that we show. Now, what is more important is that those responses are also sustained. And they are sustained both for category as well as for identity. Right? So it shows that the information is all throughout in posterior cortex. Let's see. So from this test, it seems that IAT passes. What happens with prediction number 2 in prefrontal cortex? We actually obtained significant evidence for onset responses. This is like, we actually find many of those electrodes in the brain, except that we did not find really electrodes that would have an offset response, but one. And that one was a little bit too early. But we actually acknowledge that it's there. Now, when we actually look at how is the information represented, we actually did find information for category, importantly at the onset, but we did not find at the offset. And that's what actually makes the test a failure in this case. And we did not find information about identity also in prefrontal cortex. So based on this test, we would say that we did not find responses for onset and for offset. All right, so in test number 2, we actually have a pass and a failure. What about the test number 3? As you heard from Liad, it's not enough to actually have activity. You actually have also connectivity. And this is a very important property for both theories. It's important to have connectivity between face areas, so to speak, and prefrontal cortex for G and W, and face areas and V1 in a sustained manner for IAT, right? So how do we test this? Aya and in this case also Oscar and Simon. In this case, Aya is showing us, here's a pattern of generalized psychophysiological interaction. So what are the areas that have connectivity in the brain? And here we actually find that, interestingly, when we look, we end up with IFG and with B1, B2, which is interesting, right? Because it's exactly the two sets of areas that both theories would have predicted. Now, when we do the same thing with intracranial EEG, we also find the same set of areas, except that the responses with V1 are not sustained. And that means that the prediction of IAT is not confirmed. So this is what we have so far. These are the 3 predictions that we have. Now, I want to actually emphasize one thing, which is that we think that this is just one piece of a puzzle, right? And why is this one piece of a puzzle? Because as Liad mentioned, we have a second experiment. There is also another adversarial collaborations with animals, testing exactly the same set of experiments in mice as well as in monkeys. So there's more to come, and actually significantly more converging evidence perhaps will emerge. And we hope that by actually integrating among the predictions, among the experiments, we will learn more about what consciousness is and how it's instantiated in the brain. So this is just one way to go, right? So this is just chapter 1, Now, if you want to really learn much more, because I have only 7 minutes, actually minus 59, you have to go and look at all of these posters of the students. Now, I want to conclude with this. And why I want to conclude with this? Because in January last year, we contacted Danny Kahneman and said, like, would you mind coming and talking to us? Because you are the father of adversarial collaborations. We're so enthused by your work. We really want to have you there. And then he came and delivered this message to us. People don't change their minds. And I thought, what? He ought to be wrong. So I hope that you will prove him wrong. So thank you.
Want to stay here? Fabulous. Okay. Now that all of that suspense is relieved, we're going to bring back Melanie, Stan, and Lucia to have a little bit of discussion about what these results may mean. What does it mean for the future? How do we contextualize them? Come on up, Melanie, and your mic's right here. So why don't we, Melanie, why don't we start with you? What's your reaction to these results? What do you think it means for the theory? And
so, overall, our impression is that the results confirm the predictions of IIT. That posterior cortex activity is sufficient for consciousness, but not without the need of prefrontal cortex or global broadcasting, you know. So prediction number one, that the maximum decoding would be from the posterior cortex was verified. Prediction number two, you know, as actually the results of that experiment provide exciting new results that actually activity in posterior cortex persists for as long as the experience persists, even if it's as long as 1.5 seconds, yeah? And for prediction number three, there we failed for synchrony between high and low level areas. But that might also be due to sampling limitations. So there were only 12 electrodes in the visual cortex and 472 in the prefrontal cortex. There is also another, you know, unexpected kind of finding that there were more microsaccades, especially after 500 milliseconds. And actually, because the receptive fields in visual cortex for these units are small, if there were some small changes, like microseconds, some small changes in location of the stimulus on the screen, you see it, but slightly differently, then the units involved might be different, you know, across time. And that might actually limit, you know, the assessment of synchrony. Now, this can actually be further studied in some experiments, like in animal experiments with more sampling, more precise sampling of visual cortex, and also tracking how the gaze, you know, is actually where the retinotypic location of the gaze across time, yeah? So that's something that could be further studied, and maybe will turn green in the future, we don't know. But we still hang on that prediction that this could be correct. Maybe not, but right now we're still... no, one thing I wanted to say, though, and I really wanted to thank the whole group for this amazing effort, and for the fact that this experiment is really also like a big, you know, progress in the field, by also departing from the classical contrastive analysis of just looking at seen versus unseen, but really trying to explain how the experience feels, including like why, you know, the duration, for how long it feels, yeah? And that has been done with like the highest standard of open science and collaborative efforts, which is really like a new paradigm to really advance the field and make progress in this field of science that has always been considered very challenging. So thank you to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, and I mean, it is really an immense undertaking with, you know, just the number of researchers involved all over the world, geographic locations, the number of subjects, which was extraordinary. It was like 250, right, across with all these different, you know, techniques that were used. So it really was this Herculean effort. But just one last thing, Melanie, with, you know, given these results, what's interesting is what you're saying, it's not necessarily, you know, going to modify the theory, but more looking at maybe the techniques that were used had some flaws, and to do more experiments to probe that a little bit further to see if your theory is actually still correct. Rather.
Right, I think that's really a value of these experiments, is you can all sign up on some predictions first, and then you really have to think, you know, compared to what is found versus what you had, and see if you need to revise your theory or more experiments needed. But it really stimulates kind of what is an experiment that would make a difference. Next steps, yeah. So that's,
so you
that's
think
really
these will
valuable.
be carried out? These next experiments?
And actually, to mention, there is an experiment, you know, for the Templeton, with experiment one, the same experiment in monkeys, where they also do single unit recordings. So with that experiment, we might already have enough data, like in a year or two, you know. It's already going on that this can be further specified. And again, maybe we'll be wrong, but there might still be some good chances, you know, that if we look at gaze location, we think that synchrony would be found, just more changing over time depending on where exactly you look on the screen, where exactly Mona Lisa is. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to be determined. And so Stan.
Yes.
Yes, Stan. So tell me, what's your reaction to the results and how do you contextualize it, given your theory?
Sure. I decided to follow the advice of Danny Kahneman. Always. So, and I tell you why.
Tell me.
Well, the first thing is that there are many aspects of these results that are very fitting with the theory. And I'm quite happy with it. So I was sticking my neck out a little bit, or the theory was, by predicting that there should be this sort of ignition pattern in the prefrontal cortex, and that it should contain decodable information about what the person had seen. And that's exactly what was found for the face versus objects. And it's a transient, metastable activation. It lasts for about 200 milliseconds, about 200 milliseconds after the stimulus. It's content specific. Importantly, it's there even when the stimulus is task irrelevant, which was something that goes against some of the published papers that were taken, at least, I think, a little bit too quickly by Fressel and others. And there was a long distance increase in functional correlation with the posterior processes that have the information. So all of that is really nice. And especially the fact that it's transient regardless of the duration of the stimulus. So of course we all need to be self-critical and to adjust and pursue the theory. I would just like to point also to one thing. I think there's a sharp asymmetry in the precision of the predictions from the two theories. And I don't know if Melanie will agree, but none of the mathematical backbone of IIT is being tested here. None of the phi, none of the axioms, none of that. The predictions that are presented from IIT, I think, are extremely simple, and Ned, in fact, started in the first minute with that. They would be predicted by a lot of different theories. There should be activation in processes at the back of the brain. In fact, we know from the 70s that this sort of activation will last for the stimulus, even in an anesthetized animal. So this has nothing to do with consciousness, in my opinion. And what has to do with consciousness is this ignition pattern. So now I get all of the red colors on the slides, and I want to speak a little bit about that. I think it's a bit superficial to just put red colors and say, oh, the theory is out. So I will again follow Danny's advice. So why don't we decode some information? The first thing is that in the prefrontal cortex, it's not like there are big columns or big areas like a face area that you can easily see. It's usually there might be columns, but there's a lot of intermingling of the neurons, basically. And sometimes you even see in the same neuron multiplexing of codes. And so that's what you are trying to decode. It's very difficult. And I'm looking forward to the monkey experiment, where we will have single-cell recordings. Otherwise, a lack of decoding could really mean that you've not seen the mesoscopic code, in spite of the wonderful efforts of the team. It's nothing to do with the quality of the work. It's just the sort of signals you're recording. The other thing is the theory is really about the decoupling of conscious perception from the stimulus. And here we have this sort of naive view that we just present a face for 1.5 seconds and it's enough and subjects will perceive it all the time. Well, that's not true. We know it's not true. We know that there could be a gorilla and you wouldn't be seeing if you're thinking of your grandmother. So I think this is something like this that could be happening in this experiment. Why, in this 1 hour long experiment, why would you stick to fixating your attention on being conscious for a whole 1.5 seconds while you could think of something else, like what you are going to have for lunch afterwards or something like that, right? So I think this is very well what could be happening here. And it means that if we change the task, or if we changed the attention of the subjects, we might completely change the results. And so that's something I would like to test now. And in fact, we've started to think about experiments with Lucia that could prolong this. It's very important, basically, not to assume what subjects are aware of, but to measure it. I think this is one thing that we've learned in 25 years of consciousness research. We should have introspection reports from the subjects. And if we did, we might find that this little burst of activation in prefrontal cortex is actually what they perceive.
So similar to Melanie, there's some issues with the methodology and maybe some issues with attention. And there's things like mind wandering. And so how can we create the new studies going forward to take those issues into account to get a more accurate view. I mean, I think this is a really good start for both cases, and I frankly wasn't expecting there to just be, it's all one or all the other, right? And perhaps it's some combination, right? We don't really fully know, but I think that we now have a roadmap for some studies going forward that can start to delve deeper into these issues, which we didn't really even know were going to be issues as we were mapping out the initial experiments. But I just want to get to Lucia, who's a neutral actor in this party. What are your thoughts on the results?
My thought is that I come from a family of divorced parents, and you love them both. So that's my answer.
What about conscious uncoupling and all of that? No? Co-parenting?
Well, I mean,
Thank you.
No, I mean, I think that if you take the results for, I think that both Stan and Melanie have raised important issues, which is something to do with how we understand science, and I think science is just a process. And we just showed one iteration of that, and we have boundary conditions. This is under this experiment. This is under the best techniques that we could actually have. So I grant you that, and we ran a huge effort to make this happen. And I do take, I think that the challenges that we make to the theories are substantial in that sense, because they really are through a huge, huge effort. Now, are they the last word? I think that, that's exactly why we have other experiments. We're going to have, animal experiments as well. I would be very curious to know what happens when prefrontal cortex is deactivated, what happens, when, for instance, they actually have, much more recordings from B1 or B2, which we did not have, right?
Or brain lesion studies, right?
Lesion studies, So I think that what is undeniable is that I do think that, these students set out a bar. And I think it's a really pretty high bar,
Really high.
And I think that to me is, what we set out to do, and we accomplished that. And now we, take the challenge to the field. Let's just try to do better.
And there is an experiment too, right? And I'm eagerly waiting for these results. Yeah.
Right. Yes. These are just the results
For
of
obvious
experiment
reasons.
1. There's more to come. There's a sequel. And, but I think it is a win for science, right? I mean, this whole project was really an amazing effort. When is the paper going to be published? Is it, we just submitted today.
Whoever is the reviewer, it's in your hands.
It was,
so somebody here has it in their hands.
It was submitted today, and within it there will be commentary, more in-depth commentary on the results from Stan and Melanie. And did anybody else comment on it, or was that?
No, just
okay. So you'll have their
and us.
And yes, exactly.
And it's going to be on bioRxiv.
Yes. So the paper is already on bioRxiv, provided that whatever the internet works fast and they do the review process. But tomorrow, hopefully you will see it. But the paper will be published, as I said, whenever you allow it to be published.
And there are the discussions there too in bioRxiv.
Yes,
so
yes.
And the discussions.
And one thing that I want to, thank in particular Danny, is because when we, I'm telling you because I think that it's, I was joking when I said that I come from a family of divorced parents, but I think that when you really come from a family from divorced parents, you know how to talk to different, you love them both. And you try to, understand people from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that I had quite understood how to do it in science. And Danny was extremely, such an incredible mentor to all of us, to the point that he suggested us, for instance, to run a discussion at 3 voices. So the paper that you're going to read is a paper whereby we have our discussions from the consortium, one from Stan, one from Melanie, and that would have never come, it would have crossed my mind had it not been for Danny. Right. So thank you. Thank you.
Because we have Danny Kahneman here tonight.
Hello.
Yes. We look forward to your commentary on the paper at some point. No. So I want to thank you guys so much for everything, and it's to be continued. And I'm going to bring back Christof and Dave to the stage.
Can I say one thing? I want to, I didn't have the time, but I do want you all to give a huge round of applause to Stan and Melanie and Christof and Julio. Because, first of all, the trust that they put on us is not minimal. So, you don't, I had asked 1,000 times myself, would I have allowed somebody else to run an experiment for me? And I don't think that I would have done it. So if I am totally honest. So, and I want to really also, somewhat, ask all of you to understand the courage that it took, the boldness that it took to do this. And even today on stage, because, we are not trained in science to be disconfirmed or to be challenged. So to be here today means a lot. And I really, really thank you, both of you, and Christof, for allowing us to do this.
So Christof and Dave, come back up. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on all of this. Don't let Christof's fancy colors distract you. We're Team Black. Christof's team, I don't know, multicolored, blinding color. Okay. So, now, what do you both make of these results? I'm really curious to hear.
I guess, first of all, I want to say, look, it's not about the bet. It was never about...
Sure, it's never about the bet.
Yeah, it was never about the bet. Look, the results we've just heard are amazing. This is the result of a incredibly serious 5-year research process. I mean, if the bet helps, focus a bit of attention on this amazing effort, that's great. But really, this is just an incredible achievement by Lucia and Liad and Mike, by Stan and Giulio, by Christof and Melanie, by the incredible group of students and postdocs who've been carrying out this experiment. I've been at a number of the meetings. It's just been an extraordinary endeavor, and I think we all owe them a huge amount of thanks. I mean, it's just an incredible achievement. So thanks to all of you. But second point. Look, I mean.
Of course it's about the bet.
Okay.
Mano y mano.
Okay, let's talk about the bet. Look, I would say that we got some interesting, serious challenges for both theories in this view. There were those clear red areas for both of them. Arguably, global neuronal workspace theory was challenged more seriously than integrated information theory, but there were serious challenges for both. What this brings out is we are still in the middle of the scientific process, which is a good place to be for science. We're still figuring this stuff out. Also a good place to be for me with respect to the bet, because if we're still in the middle of the scientific process, I think at the very least, things are not yet clear. It may well be that there are future experiments to be done, things may clarify, but right now, I think it's clear that things are not clear.
I think I'm going to concede that we have not achieved convergence in the general community, in the neuroscience community about the NCCs. And I have something. I happen to bring something with me.
Just in case, you brought something with you, Christof?
Whoa.
Pray tell, what will that be? The suspense is building.
Okay, what is this?
Whatever it is, I'd like some.
Oh my God, it's a case of wine. Wow.
So I have these 6 bottles. 2 of them, I tried to get one from 1988, but I got one instead from 1978. Madeira. Very
wow,
dry
fantastic.
Madeira.
1978 Madeira. Well, thank you, Christof. This means, well, all right. Well, thank you.
I concede I lost.
You lost. Well, okay.
However,
well, it's been a pleasure.
However, I'm going to double down, and I'll challenge you in 25 years from now, Dave.
Hang on.
In 25 years, we will have achieved clarity.
2023 plus 25 equals 2048. You will be 92 years old?
Springly 92, and someone may have to help me on stage.
I will be 82.
But I'll win the bet.
I will be 82 years old.
So you all
Well,
learned June 23rd, is that today?
June
Or
23rd, 2048.
Meet us here, 2048.
We will come back. Maybe we'll check in like 10, 12 years, just to see how the bet is going. I hope I lose. It will be fantastic if we know the neural correlates of consciousness within 25 years. I suspect I'll win, but we'll see.
Don't be too optimistic, all right?
Do you guys have any last words before I wrap it up? Or are you guys good? Okay.
My last word is, I think I've lost a battle, but we both have won the war.
Fantastic. We've all won the war. Thanks so much to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to ASSC, the speakers, the musicians, the crew, Dave and Ned, the organizers.
Thank you to Heather Berlin for an amazing job as MC. Oh.
5 years.